Excuse me. You are recognized. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Chair. All right, we have a lot of ground to cover relatively briefly, but in short, my name is Augustus DeRico. I'm the CEO and founder of Rainmaker. We're a cloud seeding company that is enhancing precipitation via advanced radar and also drones for the sake of supplementing water supplies for farms, cities, reservoirs, and wildlife throughout the United States. Our ultimate vision is to end water scarcity, and we've begun that mission already. I'm testifying to not oppose the spirit of this bill, which I think is well-founded, but the current configuration of the bill that I think would impede this mission for ending water scarcity and also for bringing the best-in-class technology to Florida and the rest of the United States. And so the first point that I'd like to make is the difference between solar radiation management and cloud seeding. And so Senator Garcia did bring this up briefly. Solar radiation management is a very new technology. It's not something that's been tested at length. NOAA has done some very initial experiments on its efficacy. It is attempting to reduce the amount of solar radiation that makes it down to the planet by injecting reflective aerosols into the upper atmosphere. Once you inject these aerosols, they stay in the stratosphere for years. They have effects on the entire climate. The data from these experiments, because the experiments have been so few, is limited. And so the implications of them are not something that are well tested yet. Cloud seeding is altogether different. The only similarity is that it has to do with the atmosphere. It has to do with the low atmosphere. It's a mechanism, or it's a tool that either freezes the water in existing clouds or condenses the droplets in existing clouds into bigger snowflakes or bigger droplets such that they fall onto your target watershed or farm. It's a technology that has existed for 80 years in the United States. It was patented by GE in 1946. But it hasn't been viable for a long time because we didn't have the appropriate radar to measure exactly what its effect is. I can tell you definitively that there is not cloud seeding going on in the state of Florida because you would be able to see its effect on radar. So the National Center for Atmospheric Research produced some great results from what's called the SNOWY campaign, where they were able to verify cloud seeding's effect, and they saw tens of millions of gallons of precipitation occur from each of their interventions. And that was very, very easily distinguishable on radar. It also is worth saying that it's local in its scope, and it is very short temporally. So if ever there is cloud seeding going on and you don't like the consequences of it, there are unintended consequences, and it's quite well characterized, so the unintended consequences are minimal. You can stop whenever you like. So that point of differentiation between solar radiation management, which is something that I think the public should scrutinize more heavily, and cloud seeding, is important to make from the top. Then the second point I'd like to make is that, well, it has to do with the safety of cloud seeding, right? Because this has to do with environmental health, particularly pollution. Cloud seeding is conventionally done with a chemical called silver iodide. Its LD50, so its lethal dose, is 10 times higher than aspirin. And we're using about 50 grams per each operation. That's as much as can fit in the palm of your hand, right? That's less flour than is in a slice of bread. So the amount that accumulates into watersheds is in the parts per trillion after decades of operation, and we have data to prove that from programs that exist throughout the United States. This leads me into another point, which is the precedent that other states have set in cloud seeding permitting and licensing. So I think that, per what I said at the top of my commentary, the spirit of this bill to protect Floridians, to protect Americans from environmental pollution, that is great. And I think that permitting and licensing absolutely should exist. It does exist in states like Texas and Utah and Idaho. So this isn't a blue state or red state issue. California has a process as well. New Mexico has a process. And we don't want anybody wantonly modifying the weather. So implementing a permitting regime so that it's only done responsibly and safely with best-in-class meteorological practices, that makes sense. And we advocate for that. Not only do we advocate for that, we, Rainmaker Technology Corporation, has engineers in all of those states that I mentioned that are actively modifying the weather, that are actively enhancing precipitation for farmers and reservoirs and cities that are undergoing drought. And that brings me into like my third and closing point. Like, what is this bill about? What are we voting on here? Yes, this has to do with Florida, first and foremost. I don't think that burdening the state with more regulation, with more permitting on investigation is something that it would necessarily be excited about, but if it was for the sake of protecting Floridians, that makes sense. I don't think that we want to prevent Florida's access to best-in-class technology for their agriculture and their water and their wildlife. But more than that, it has to do with the United States, both domestically and abroad. No ifs, ands, or buts. Mar-a-Lago exists here. Florida is a very consequential state within the United States. And if weather modification is banned here, that sets a precedent to deprive farmers in even more arid regions of the country from getting access to water from cloud seeding. And so if only for the sake of other Americans, for other farming interests, for other cities like Salt Lake, which is currently radically under budget for their water supply, and people are getting respiratory issues from the dust kicked up from the evaporation, cloud seeding could mitigate that. If this precedent is set here, it could affect other Americans. And not only could it affect us immediately within the United States, but long-term it could affect us geopolitically, because China has a $300 million annual budget for weather modification research and operations. And if we are to ban this here, if that precedent is set throughout the rest of the United States and perhaps federally, then we will lose control over the weather to China. And that's not something that I, as a patriot, or I think anybody else in Florida would advocate for. So in closing, I think that permitting and licensing for cloud seeding, which is a technology that other states throughout the union have adopted and created, I advocate for wholeheartedly, but SRM is something altogether different.
Thank you, Mr. Dorico. I think Senator Pizzo has a question for you.
I do. I might have like 1.5 questions. Have you, as your firm, submitted for any kind of licensing or permitting here in the state of Florida?
No, we have not, but I'd love to later this year.
Paul?
Yeah, go ahead. Back up.
Why not?
So Utah, Arizona, California, Texas, they have far worse drought issues on a recurring basis than Florida. And so the demand for it hasn't been as impending and as great as it has been in the southwestern United States.
Okay, and then some follow-up on it. I'm actually kind of familiar with silver iodide, and obviously its most drastic effect is, I never say this right, is it argyria?
Colloidal silver, I think is what you're thinking of.
No, but argyria is a condition that happens when you ingest too many silver particles.
Yeah, so silver iodide is different. The iodide molecule, or the iodide atom, stabilizes it so it doesn't bioaccumulate either in fat or water. You would just excrete it.
Follow?
Yep.
But it leads to what is colloquially known as like the blue people, like your skin turns purple.
That's exclusively silver. Like I said, the iodide molecule makes this a much safer compound.
Okay. And I have read some studies actually that were sent to me. There are 37,000 people employed by the nation of China. They do everything from cloud seeding to end dust situations. And they also made sure that it rained in the Olympics outside of Beijing so it didn't interfere and we were rain-free for the Olympics then. But there have been some conditions that have resulted from, and I think we have it in a small section of a mining community in Kentucky, but there actually is this argyria as a result of it. And they're not denying that it happens. These are mostly used for agricultural applications, right?
Well, so first of all, you would not get argyria from silver iodide, once again, because of the iodide atom, although I think that chronic silver exposure is a bad thing. Moreover, even if the silver iodide were to decompose into silver itself, we're operating in the parts per trillion regime, which is far, far, far beneath what would be considered toxic over any time scale for humans or the environment. Then, per your other point, yes, China does have 37 to 40,000 people employed in their weather modification office, and Rainmaker's ultimate vision is, as a show of force, as a show of American technological strength and dominance, to provide fresh powder and snow to the Utah Olympics in 2034, rather than totally cede ground on this really strategically important technology to China and let them do that again, per the 2008 Olympics.
There's one last question.
Go ahead.
St. Thomas Aquinas, I think, proved that which is of matter cannot be of matter as a conclusive proof from a theological perspective. But here's a question I have. Is there a fixed amount of water molecules in a local or in a universal atmosphere?
Critically important question.
Because it would seem to follow that if whatever you're taking from the atmosphere, naturally occurring from the atmosphere to seed a particular targeted area, is taking a natural precipitation or weather pattern from some other area that might also be depending upon its natural cyclical precipitation schedule.
No, so the question of stealing from Peter to pay Paul, right? That is a question as old as cloud seeding itself, and it's one that I think requires sophisticated permitting to ensure that that's not going on. What I'll say is, yes, there's a fixed amount of water on the planet in the atmosphere. However, 91% of all the water, so vapor, liquid, and ice, that traverses the continental United States does not precipitate over the United States. Moreover, most precipitating clouds are only about 20 to 40% efficient. So most of the water from precipitating clouds does not actually come down. Moreover, lots of clouds don't ever naturally precipitate. And so what you can do with sophisticated radar processing like we've developed or probes is identify clouds that are never going to naturally precipitate or that are going to precipitate over the oceans, and then purely do positive sum seeding by targeting those clouds rather than depleting other watersheds.
Sorry, I have one follow-up question. It's in two parts. There's a tipping point for, I mean, we're going back to third grade here, but cirrus, cumulus, nimbus. I mean, there's a tipping point when you reach a saturation level of a cloud formation where it lets go and just lets loose. So even in its travels, and I agree with you, but the supposition is that even in its travels, it may be picking up more, becoming more dense, and at some point falling wherever it falls. But if you were to go ahead and target an area, let's say, for instance, by way of exercise, to bring potable water to the west, we wanted to go ahead and dam up and then fill the Grand Canyon, that is placing and depositing a large volume of water, which would otherwise be precipitation somewhere in the world. So if our clouds drop rain in the Atlantic or on the coast of Portugal, then presumably we're getting Japan and Korea's clouds that began and formed and then rain on the west coast of California. So my question is, if you're depositing a large volume of water in one particular area, doesn't it naturally follow that it's taking away from some other area later on?
No. I think now, climate systems, weather systems, very complicated, very dynamic. And again, targeting clouds.
I'm not that bright, so you can educate me.
No, me neither. But we've got some great scientists at Rainmaker, thanks to Dr. Caitlin Susky. She's watching at home. Anyway, no, the oceans. The oceans and evapotranspiration from land are constantly replenishing these systems. Most atmospheric rivers that come from the Pacific, most of the tropical systems that come up from the South Atlantic, their vapor never makes it to the other coast. So we would never deplete Europe by seeding and by inducing precipitation on the western United States. We would never deplete Greenland by inducing precipitation over the eastern United States from tropical systems. Yes, there's a fixed amount, but there is so much land to traverse and so much water to traverse that would be picked up by these systems later that the, like 1 to 20% in the most favorable cases of precipitation enhancement from these systems would not impede downwind
I'm sorry.
precipitation.
Go for it. You said 1 to 20%.
Mm-hmm.
In a 1 hour storm, how much water falls and accumulates on 1 acre of land? You know, I do.
In a 1 hour storm, it depends on the rain rate.
In a 1 hour average rainfall onto 142,000 square foot acre of land, do you know how many gallons of water fall into 1 acre?
Average rainfall in Florida, it depends on the system.
You pick wherever you want.
In the Central Valley, I think it's about 12 inches cumulatively per year, so it's probably something like a 20th of an acre foot or so, which would be like 50,000 gallons-ish.
Okay. In 65 minutes in South Florida, in Miami-Dade County, 1 acre of land can take up to 360,000 gallons of water.
So it's about an acre foot, yeah.
So when you say 20% of an area's targeted rainfall, you're talking about tens of millions of gallons of water.
So 2 points on that. First of all, in all of our permits and for all of our licenses, we have suspension criteria, meaning if a system is bound to naturally precipitate above a certain threshold that would cause flooding or risk of flooding, if the soil is saturated such that it couldn't retain more water, then we suspend all operations. And the farmers that we work with often get pissed off about that because they want the water. But for the sake of safety, for the sake of liability, we don't operate when there is risk of flooding. So that's the first point. Then the second point is, in the most optimistic cases, in the most favorable cases, you can enhance precipitation that much. In some clouds, and this is a point worth reiterating, in some clouds you can't make them precipitate at all. If you have a blue sky, we can't make a cloud. If you see long streaks in the sky, be they contrails or chemtrails, that has nothing to do with cloud seeding. Cloud seeding takes existing clouds with lots of liquid water in them and induces precipitation based on what the cloud has available. I think that risk of flooding, concerns about flooding, it's something that absolutely should be regulated, and I would advocate for that in the state of Florida, just the same as Texas and Utah and Idaho have.
Additional questions? Senator Berman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You just said whether they be contrails or chemtrails, so Do you believe that that chemtrails are a thing?
Many have asked. I think that contrails certainly are something that would occur without any additives or without any malevolently added pollutants to jet fuel. Could it be that there are additives to fuels or activities from planes that would impede human and environmental health? Yes, and there is precedent of the United States government doing chemical weapons testing over Missouri and other places in the country. So should we scrutinize that? Yes, absolutely. Can we distinguish that very easily from cloud seeding and identify cloud seeding and its effect? Yes, also, absolutely.
Additional questions? Seeing none, we are still in public testimony. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Renee Cummings, speaking